engaging the community since 1970. This is WIS Awareness.
Good morning. Thanks for joining me today for Awareness. I'm your host, Leland Pender. Today, local law enforcement weigh in on the case and trial of Derek Chauvin now that the trial is over. Chauvin was, of course, convicted of murder charges in the death of George Floyd back in 2020. Private investigator Chandra, who's also a veteran law enforcement officer, she spent 20 years with the Richland County Sheriff's Department, joins us this morning. But thanks so much, Chandra, for coming on today and kind of giving us your thoughts and lending your expertise in the area of law enforcement. So how are you? How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So let's just start off, real generally with George Floyd and Derek Chauvin, just that interaction between the two of them, your thoughts on that, and then, of course, your thoughts on the verdict that we just got in the Chauvin case just a few days ago. What are your general thoughts in reaction to the whole situation?
Well, I can tell you when I first saw the video, I cried and I just said, why? This is not what we're trained in the police academy. This is just blatant out murder in plain sight, in front of everyone, for everyone to see. It broke my heart so much because, I don't want to paint every law enforcement with the same pen that all law enforcement is bad. No, there's no way. But just like I tell everyone, there are some bad apples in every bunch, and we have to weed those people out. And when the verdict came out, I was very, very happy. I even cried when the verdict was read. But it also brought to me the sense of now we have to call out all of the other ones that are out here that is just blatantly taking lives for no reason. Once you are in that situation and you have a suspect that seems not to be in control, you're to get control of them and you're to sit them up and arrest them. Mm-hmm. That's what you're supposed to do. And in this case, regardless of him being under control, more than enough officers involved to control the situation, this man took it upon himself not to listen to anybody who was on the scene that was saying that it was enough. Okay, sit him up. Mm-hmm. And that really hurt me. I mean,
well, and I don't want to
ask. I just didn't know more I could take of seeing those things occur.
Right. And I certainly don't want to ask you to try and, get in the mind or the brain of Derek Chauvin. But in that instance, given that you know what should have taken place, why do you think an officer in that position would not follow those appropriate steps once the threat was no longer a threat or the suspect was under control? Why do you think an officer might continue with that restrictive, somewhat violent behavior?
Well, Leland, like I've told everyone else who've asked me that question, if I could understand or know why he did what he did, then something would be wrong with me. I cannot tell you what he was thinking. But I know one thing, that I knew his results, what he wanted his results to be, and that is for him to die, because he had every notion from bystanders to first responders telling him, okay, that's enough, get off of him and start CPR. So he wanted the results that he was trying to get on that day.
And talking about bad apples, in any profession, people don't want a bad apple representing what they do. In law enforcement, mm-hmm. How hard is it to identify those people? And also, what we saw in this case was other police officers testifying against Derek Chauvin. And so how tough is that sometimes to, get police to speak against or tell the truth, even if it makes one of their own look bad?
Well, I'll tell you this. When I was in law enforcement and I saw that someone was, a use of force was a little bit too much, I gave them one warning. One, I don't do 1, 2, 3, you're out, I'm going to go and tell someone else. One warning, hey, buddy, you need to tone that down. That was a little bit too much. And if they did it again, I would bring it to the attention of a higher up. You know, many times people say once you say something about someone in law enforcement, they blackball you and you don't get any backup or whatever. That never happened to me on the two people that I saw who was using excessive force, and I brought it to their attention, and I could say around me, it did not happen again.
And remind us again how long your law
So,
enforcement career was, because you say 2 instances, and I want to just highlight the idea that these things happen absolutely, but, you know, are they pretty rare?
They are pretty rare. As far as I can say in my department, I worked at Richland County for 20 years, and I've had now my own private investigation firm now for 17 years. And during the 20 years at Richland County Sheriff Department, I can say some of the things that I saw was very sparely. That's why I do not want people to make a broad stroke across all law enforcement being bad, because it's not. And those bad apples, from now on, I see that they need to be called to the forefront. And whatever officer who's making that allegations, that they be taken seriously and not blackball for giving that information.
What do you think needs to happen for there to at the very least, be a general perception among many in the public of equal treatment under the law? Because that's, of course, the issue that's at play, is people are treated differently in different situations involving law enforcement. You know, there's instances where one group is killed or severely hurt or injured when others are not, and sometimes for, you know, even worse or more severe crimes or offenses. So what do you think it's going to take to have that general perception, at the least, of equal treatment under the law?
I think it's going to take exactly what happened a few days ago, and that is a guilty verdict because of your behavior. More and more of those guilty verdicts will ensue, that they will get the notion that you need to treat everyone the same. During my time in the police academy, it was beaten in our head 1,000 times. If you take someone's life unlawfully, if the threat is no longer a threat, you need to stop. If you do not, it will be excessive use of force, and you will be hung out to dry by yourself. We were told that so many times. That's what I took in play. I decided that, okay, I understand, I get it. If the threat is ever leaving me, and if I ever get the threat under control, the use of force is to stop. It's plain and simple. So I don't understand why we're having these deadly encounters, why we're having so many people after their arrest. You look at their background and it says that this person has had allegations for the last 12 years, yet they're still wearing that their badge. It's things like that. I mean, police reform is truly needed, because I think that communities have given law enforcement too much control. But what I mean by that is that we call them for everything. They're there to bring peace. They are there to protect you from harm. Things like people grilling outside in a neighborhood, someone walking in a neighborhood who does not belong, those type of things are not what you call law enforcement for. So police reform and the community understanding what the process is for law enforcement to be that peace officer and to protect and serve, then I think our police department will fall in line.
What is the responsibility of the public, of the citizenry, when having interactions with law enforcement and other police agencies? Just what do they need to know? You know, what's their part in facilitating de-escalation of interactions and you know, leading to good outcomes? What's the responsibility of us?
Well, you asked that question, and I'm sitting here, my mind is running like, oh, what's the responsibility of the community? Well, the responsibility of the community, I don't know what more, well, I can say what more they need to do is to make sure that, you abide by the commands, first of all. And I do know that there have been 6 others, more than 6, that abide by the commands and was still fatally injured. So once you're there, it says in the Black community, when your teens start driving, law enforcement pull you over, you're to do this, 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 and this. But if the community keep doing what they need to do, yet they are doing fatal injuries, only thing I can say about that is to keep filming and bringing it to court, filming from beginning to end, because that seems like the only way that justice will prevail. And that's a really sad thing. But I always tell people to comply. And if you have someone that's filming, allow them to film it and head to court. Be able to live to have your day in court.
Soon after the verdict in the Chauvin trial came down, the Columbia Police Department put out a statement to the community. Columbia Police Chief Skip Holbrook said, quote, "Justice has been served in Minneapolis today. We agree with the criminal charges and findings. Similar to what the prosecutor stated during closing arguments, the case was about a bad officer and not a bad profession." After another quick break here, we'll talk with Columbia Police Department Chief Deputy Melron Kelly. Very happy to be joined this morning by Columbia Police Department's Chief Deputy Melron Kelly on all of this. First of all, good morning, Melron. How are you?
Morning. Doing well.
Great. Thanks again for taking some time to be here. Just to get started, give me your initial thoughts and just reaction to the verdict in the Chauvin trial and just the case itself that's kind of played out over the entire last year.
Over the last year was really an awakening moment for me in law enforcement. Just after the events in Minneapolis, seeing, hearing, the death of George Floyd and actually having an impact on me personally. I, like many, awaited the verdict and bated breath. And to know that justice was ultimately served is a very, very good thing for us. It was nothing you could say to defend that. I mean, it was murder.
Absolutely, and that is certainly what the jury found as well, and that was certainly the thought of many in the general public. So tell me, what kind of conversations have been happening at CPD following this verdict, and again, really throughout the entire year as we dealt with this situation and multiple others of the same nature? How have you been talking to officers just about how to go about their daily lives and performing police work?
Well, like many other agencies, not only the verdict portion, but the event itself caused us to have some very, very needed conversations in law enforcement as the events around the nation unraveled last year. And it caused us to really put out in the open how people were feeling and thinking inside this agency as it relates to not only the use of force, but just how do we respect human dignity? The use of force in law enforcement is not a pleasant thing at any level. However, we have to employ just some sound tactics and thinking about human dignity when we do that. So those are the conversations that we have with our staff, and we brought to the table from the forefront that this wasn't right. We had to speak out against it, not only in this agency, but around the nation. Law enforcement executives did. And we just wanted our officers and our professional staff members to know that this is not what law enforcement should be about and is about, especially in Columbia.
And so when you think about training and, more specifically trying to subdue or control a suspect in, any given situation, when does an officer know that they're exercising too much restraint or not enough? Like, what's the sweet spot, or what's the moment, what goes off in the officer's head when, again, they know this is too much or not enough?
Well, what we ask is from even the outset of an incident, to try to de-escalate it as best we can, so the use of force is not even needed. When all that fails, we do have to employ some level of tactical, advancement on a person to use in using force. But once that person is no longer resisting or showing resistance, then it's over. We provide them care afterwards, and we definitely, stand them up and get them out of the situation.
And so that's certainly not what happened in this case. Does that make you angry that another officer in your profession did that? And of course, it kind of went all over the world. Does it make you sad? How does it make you feel?
It angered me, not only as a police officer, but as an African American man. People should know, that how to treat one another, right? And for me, it just struck me as just the care for the human dignity. Whether a person has committed a crime or not, we have to, at our most basic level, care about one another. And when that's not employed, we do a disservice to the uniform and to what we stand for. It was a black eye for law enforcement all around the nation.
Of course, right now there is a heightened level of scrutiny of police officers and law enforcement agencies. Kind of a two-part question here. Have you ever seen this level of just attention and scrutiny before on the profession? And, given police officers are indeed public servants, is this level of scrutiny fair and somewhat expected or not?
Well, looking through the lens of as a police officer, I've never seen this level of attention paid to specifically to police tactics. The only other thing that comes to mind is during the Rodney King riots back in LA of '92. But I do think that it's time to have those uncomfortable conversations. And we have to get out of the mode of thinking that the police or law enforcement knows what's best for the community. I think this is a conversation that should be had collectively through members of the community, law enforcement, and our elected officials in order to provide the right guidance. You'll see around the nation, in Baltimore, New Orleans, they're coming together collectively to kind of reimagine how we're policing and how they're going to police in those cities and towns. And I do think it's a collective conversation. It shouldn't be just law enforcement centric.
Talk about the rights of citizens to, of the public, the police serve, to request or demand that accountability and transparency. And also, do police officers, to what degree can they request the same thing from the public?
It goes back to mutual respect and understanding. But from the outset, I would say, let's not wait until we have a tragic or unfortunate incident to start developing those relationships. On the outset of a use of force situation or misconduct by an officer is not the time for us to go out there and try to develop relationships. That is an ongoing, everyday, 24-hour type of situation that we should always be trying to garner those relationships, because we know relationships with the community garners understanding and it provides trust. And that's what we're in need of desperately in this line of work. And we should want to get to that point where the community has a voice in how they're being policed. And in order for us to do that, I think we as a profession should be more open to relationships in policing. We should want those relationships in our communities.
One term that emerged over the last year was defund the police. And it depends on who you ask, whether how radical that is or isn't. But another term that kind of emerged in response to that was reimagining or reimagine policing. When you hear that term, reimagine policing, what does that mean to you? And what does that look like?
To me, I think it's really closely looking at and focusing on the services that you would like for your law enforcement agencies to provide. And the second part of that is, are we best suited to provide a lot of those services? Case in point, mental illness is a great problem that we deal with in law enforcement. Are we always best suited to respond to those calls for service? Would a mental health professional or clinician be better suited to do that? How we deal with, juveniles or young kids. We have calls where parents call the police on kids that don't want to go to school today. Are we best suited to handle that? Is there someone else that could better handle that situation? So we have to really take a close look at the calls for service that we're responding to, and are we really best suited to handle those? That's reimagining policing to me. So to me, defund the police and wasn't a negative in the sense of people taking money away from police departments. It was really looking at how we're allocated and are those dollars, or could those dollars be best used with helping out other services? And I would say, let's take a look at it and let's do it where we need to.
And I want to just ask you something further on something you mentioned there. Knowing when to call the police, what's appropriate to ask for help from the police for? Of course, we've seen many instances where some people have requested police services for things that, you know, they shouldn't, that are somewhat frivolous. How do you encourage the public to use, you know, this service of policing smartly and only when it's truly needed? How do you get that message out there?
Yeah, case in point, emergencies or life-threatening event. But a lot of times those calls are good, what we call lack of being a good neighbor calls. The loud music or the dog on my lawn and things of that nature are calls that could be handled through just genuine conversation between people who are acquainted or neighbors. And we would like to not be involved in cases where it's not that, where people can work it out amongst themselves. But if you call the police, we're coming. 100% of the time, we're coming, and we're going to try to de-escalate and handle the situation. That's a service that we provide. That's the bedrock of policing. We also wear many hats, and we have to look at how we can best de-escalate situations to not, you know, enter into an arrest.
So with everything happening around the country, gosh, I mean, even this year, but just throughout history, you know, how do you maintain confidence here in your local community and maintain trust here locally when all these other instances are just really at the forefront of everyone's mind right now? And again, this heightened scrutiny of police officers.
Yeah, well, you know, when I put on this uniform, I wear the history that comes with it. And sometimes that history isn't kind. But I would like to think that, you know, in Columbia, we do things a bit different. It is my hometown, born and raised. I'm a champion of this city. I love it. And I just would like to think that our relationships or the relationships that we've established wear the test of time. But when we don't do things right, we're not above reproach. Call us out. Have those conversations again. I think that's what's going to change the dynamic. But having collective community support in how we police will be beneficial to the community as a whole. And we have to get to doing more of that. That's what's missing, and that's what we need.
Chief Deputy Melron Kelly of the Columbia Police Department, thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you.